For content warnings and a link to the written version of his story, please check the description below. This week's story is based on Dr. Foster, a nursery rhyme by an unknown songwriter, 1844. Remember that you can check out my Cash App to support me, my GoFundMe to support me with my transition, and my commissions are still open. Check the description for more information, and don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get right onto the story. Dr. Foster headed home. The wind began picking up, and soon enough it was pouring it down with rain. The rain grew heavier and heavier until the doctor realised he was amid a storm. He looked around, desperate to find some kind of shelter, but the rain was too heavy and clouded his vision. He took a step back and slipped on the sludge that sat below him. The doctor sank into the mud, trying to clutch onto his bag, hoping for some way to pull himself out. But it was too late. The mud now covered his mouth, and he shut his eyes tight as he slipped further into the depths of the earth. Mr. Foster paced back and forth, worried about the whereabouts of his husband. He was never this late. Dr. Foster was known for his punctuality. Mr. Foster gazed out the window as the storm eased. He ran outside as soon as it appeared safe, not caring to change out of his nightgown. He ran down the street searching for the man he held so dear, until he found the bag. It laid on its side, its handle pointing towards the mud which held claw marks. It was at this point Mr. Foster understood what had happened, but he was so overcome with grief that he dug his fingers into the mud and clawed at it, hoping to find some sign that his husband was still alive. Nothing. That's what struck Mr. Foster as odd. The mud was deep, but not deep enough to leave no trace of a body. Dr. Foster couldn't have sunk all the way through the earth. Could he? Drip, drip, drip. Water dropped onto the sleeping doctor's nose. His eyes opened to a dark blue light that made him nauseous when he looked at it. Dr. Foster tried sitting up, but bumped his head into the dirt above. He rubbed his forehead in a sorry attempt to ease the pain before looking over his shoulder to scoop out what was behind him. The same as what sat above him. There was no way to climb up through the earth. It was far too thick. He'd have to crawl forward through the tunnel and, with any luck, find an exit. The man crawled for hours, exhausted. He wanted nothing more than to give up, but he couldn't. He had to escape. He had to get back to his husband. Light poured into the tunnel, blinding him. He gave a tired laugh of relief before his face contorted into a horrified expression. At first, the water leaked in slowly, but then it came crashing in, submerging the doctor. Good riddance to him, I say. Mr. Foster's mother shrugged as she placed her cigarette pipe between her teeth and inhaled the toxic substance. Mother, he's my husband, Mr. Foster replied. Yes, I'm well aware of your unfortunate marital status. She chuckled to herself, much to her son's dismay. Oh, come on, Oscar. The man is vile. I was speaking to one of my girlfriends the other day, and she told me that when he saw her brother, he laughed at his sorry state. Your husband takes pleasure in the pain of others. So no, I don't feel bad for hoping he drowned in that puddle. In fact, imagine him stuck in that mud up to his middle and knowing he can't escape makes me rather giddy. Mr. Foster couldn't believe his ears. He knew his mother didn't like his husband, but to relish in thought of his death, Oscar didn't care how awful his husband was to his patients. In his eyes, his mother was far worse. Leave my house right now, he demanded the woman. The woman rolled her eyes as she stood from her chair. She swanned around the room, dropping ash wherever she went. Except it's not your house, is it, darling boy? You could never afford such comforts. Without that creature you married, you'd be living in a hovel covered in cobwebs, I'm certain. She headed towards the door. Luxuries you indulge in, mother. Without him, you wouldn't be wearing such a fine garment. His mother laughed and glanced over her shoulder. I loathe him, darling, but I never said he wasn't of any use. She turned away and with her back to her son said, Thank goodness he left everything to you in his will. Perhaps now you can find your own poor boy to marry and play his part. Ta-ra, my love, ta-ra. Dr. Foster gasped for air. He lifted his head from the rock he was lying on. Water thrashed against his ankles as blood from his hands flowed through the nooks and crannies of the sharp entity, raising itself out of the ocean. His eyes flickered open to meet the eyes of his husband. Oscar? He laughed with relief. Oscar gave a blank stare. Oscar? Dr. Foster reached out to touch his spouse's cheek. Oscar tilted his head, curiosity in his eyes. He was examining the man before as if he'd never seen him before. After several blinks, Oscar's face disappeared. In its place, the face of another attractive man appeared. "Who are you?" Dr. Foster leaned in closer, entranced. The man leaned forward only inches from the doctor's face. Dr. Foster closed his eyes, ready for their lips to meet, but the creature launched forwards, forcing the man under the water as he thrashed and thrashed, trying to free himself. It was difficult to see, but Dr. Foster could make out the creature's tail flowing behind it. Slits in the creature's neck began opening and closing whilst it breathed. He glanced to his shoulder, seeing the webbed claws that held down. Dr. Foster kicked as hard as he could. The creature squealed from the shock of the hit and loosened its grip. This didn't stop the creature, however. It only resulted in making it more angry. It grabbed the doctor by his arm and dug its claws deep into his flesh, causing him to scream and swallow water. By now, Dr. Foster was becoming lightheaded, but in his last few moments of consciousness, he remembered learning how to fight with a shark. Though this creature wasn't a shark, the man realised that it acted similar enough to one that the fighting techniques may work. Dr. Foster stared into the angry eyes of the monster and lunged his free hand into the gills on its neck. The creature then released its grip and swiped with desperation at its neck. Dr. Foster pushed himself to the surface and choked up the seawater he had swallowed. He made his way back to the rock as fast as he could, and when the creature reared its head again, he punched it square on the nose, knocking it out successfully. As the creature sank far into the belly of the ocean, Dr. Foster let out an enormous sigh of relief before realising he was stuck in the middle of nowhere. Oscar carried the tea out to the garden. "Thank you for doing this for me, Glevum. I've been so distracted with..." He sighed as he handed over the cup. "This is nothing. Did you hear about that giant turnip it took an entire village to pull up?" Oscar shook his head with a laugh and knelt down next to the gardener. "Thank you," he smiled, planting a kiss on the man's cheek. Both men paused. I'm so sorry." Oscar jumped to his feet. I'm sorry." He prepared to run back inside, but he was stopped when Glevum grabbed his wrist. The gardener placed his tea down next to a flower bed and got to his feet. He looked Oscar in the eyes and took both of his hands in his. The world paused as the two men kissed each other. The small meeting of their lips intensified, and in their moment of passion, Glevum's foot knocked over the tea, spilling it into the earth. The water trickled over the doctor's bare feet as he carried his boots onto the sandy beach. It had taken him hours to find land, and now he had. Satisfying his hunger became his next priority. A coconut tree sat feet away, and upon seeing it, Dr. Foster threw his shoes to the ground and charged at it. He shook the tree with so much power that a dozen coconuts fell around him. "Save some for the rest of us." The man turned around in shock. No one was there. He reached down for a coconut and found a bird of 100 colours looking up at him. "We need to eat those too." The parrot laughed. Dr. Foster looked around, spotting no one else but the pair of them. "It's only us." The parrot tilted his head. "Is it?" The doctor stepped back and looked up to the sky. The trees were littered with parrots, all looking down on him. "I just require one. You can have the rest." The parrots continued to stare. Since no more movement had been made, Dr. Foster continued to open the coconut by slamming it against a nearby rock. He was disgusted to see it rotten aside. "Just like you." The parrot jumped into view. The man stood up, preparing to turn, but found himself surrounded by the parrots who had come down from the trees in silence. "What do you mean?" The parrots all tilted their heads together. "We can smell the rot on you. You're a bad person." The other parrots called in reply, "Bad person." They all jumped closer, further entrapping the man. The parrots were larger than the small parrot that had greeted him, and as they came closer and closer, the top of their heads were level with his waist. The parrots now trapped Dr. Foster within them, and then they attacked. "Mr. Foster, I regret to inform you that we have found your husband dead." Oscar's mother ran up behind the officer. She could smell something was up from a mile away and had followed him to her son's home. "That's wonderful news," she sang, peering over the man's shoulder and smiling at her son. She spun to face the officer, who was taken aback by her abrupt joy. "How did it happen? Oh, I hope it was ghastly." She danced on the spot before waiting an answer. "Mr. Foster, your husband's torso was discovered washed up on the shore this morning. There was significant damage to his lower abdomen. We believe a group of creatures had eaten him right up to his middle. The officer bowed his head. Wonderful news. Thank you for your time. I can take it from here. Oscar's mother shooed the man aside as he looked back to Oscar, who stood in his doorway expressionless. His mother ushered him in and sat him down in a small lounge, beaming with joy. This is your house now, Oscar. Isn't this great? The wretched fellow has been eaten right up to his middle and will never be seen again. The mother cackled as Glevum entered the room. What's happening? I heard excitement. Oscar turned to Glevum with a sly smile on his face. The house is ours. He jumped from his chair as Glevum lifted and spun him around with delight. They look happy, the officer said. Thank you for doing this for me. You can go back to work now, Foster said, watching the two men embrace through his old window. Are you coming? There are new patients that could use your help, Foster's old friend asked. I've helped no one in my life. The birds taught me that, Foster smiled. Birds? Are you okay? Foster glanced over to the fence. Yes, the parrots. Can't you see them? The ones that ate half my body. Foster's friend looked at him with concern in his eyes. I thought you made that story up. You know you have legs, right? Doctor, there are no birds. Foster laughed at the thought. Next you'll be telling me I didn't fight a sea monster. His friend placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't you remember? I found you in the storm. You fought me, and then I took you home and patched you up. You told me not to worry your husband. Foster looked at his friend with blankness. I remember my vow to make Oscar happy. He will be far happier in that man's arms than mine. I'm a bad person. I hurt so many people. I need to make them all happy like Oscar and his family. I need to make amends. He laughed to himself. Will you help me do that? Make amends? He pleaded to his colleague. Of course I will, but right now you need to come home with me. I knew this was too soon. Come on, Dr. Foster. It's time to go home. Dr. Foster shook himself off and turned away. We can never come back here. Can we? He began walking away with his friend. Well, I can't imagine so. Oscar thinks you're dead. With one last look over his shoulder, Dr. Foster laughed. The best news he's had through our entire relationship. Sometimes the right thing to do is to let the people you love go. I was poison to him, and he had no idea until he found the antidote. Love is a powerful thing, and some people like me don't deserve it. The pair strolled away. Never let me come here again. His friend nodded. Never again. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please subscribe, like, comment, share. You know how YouTube works. On Monday, I will be releasing the first episode of my terms that I learned this week, which is part of my Under the Queer Umbrella series, where I will go over 7 terms that I learned this week and 7 terms that were newly added this week. On Tuesday, I will be reading A Turnip from Kikopia, Chapter 9, and on Thursday, I will be adding a accompaniment to my Hunchback of Notre Dame retelling, which will be based on hidden disabilities. So again, thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to see more content like this, and I will see you all later. Bye.